Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. We do so by painting an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those individuals are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality and the reintegration process. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please, welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 86 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Oftentimes in the world of risk assessment, specifically the risk assessment we use in the risk need responsivity framework, we talk quite often as to the differences between static risk and dynamic risk. Static risk being those things we cannot change, such as one's criminal history, and dynamic risk being those things that we can have an influence on or indeed change. These would be things such as deficits around employment and education, substance use struggles, an abundance of negative peer influence and or a lack of pro-social supports in one's life. Today, we are going to build on that concept of dynamic versus static by introducing you to a term known as dynamic security. Dynamic security within the context of our prison system. Brian Koehn is going to tell you all about dynamic security and so much more. Brian Koehn is the founder and president of Social Profit Corrections, the country's only for-purpose full-time corrections corporation. Their nonprofit business model is a new concept in consulting and managing secure correctional and reentry facilities. Brian is about to tell you all about it, but all profits received from federal and state contracts for corrections residents will be put toward overall rehabilitation, including well-being, mental wellness, education, and job training. I really appreciate Brian's enthusiasm, which at times can be just what we need in taking on challenges such as those we face in implementation world. Please enjoy my conversation with fellow St. Cloud State graduate Brian Koehn, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, why don't we start off, Brian, by you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, both professionally and education-wise, so folks get sort of an idea of the journey that you've been on.
Absolutely. And good morning, Joe. And thank you for having me on your podcast today. My name is Brian Koehn. Grew up in St. Cloud, Minnesota, just north of yourself. Went to high school in St. Cloud and went to St. Cloud State for a bachelor's in criminal justice upon release of the Marine Corps. So yeah, I'm a Minnesota native. So I did, professional wise, I finished the degree and was looking, criminal justice and looking for an occupation. And so I was like, well, there's this new prison starting in Appleton, Minnesota. Well, that's intriguing because I had criminal justice classes, corrections classes, for the bachelor's. And this was an independent private prison, which that was unique. At the time, it was the only one of its kind. It was actually owned by the city, but it was considered private because it wasn't government, because it was a city-run function. It was an economic development project for Appleton, Minnesota is what it was. So I took a job there thinking I was just going to do a summer, working in corrections to kind of get some experience and then, expand from there. But the reality is I was hooked. The people aspect, the helping aspect of corrections I was drawn to, and then 28 years later, moved 8 times across the United States. And I ended up working for actually private corrections. So, and privates are, they're different than government corrections in that clearly they're for-profit companies. But the benefit of privates is you get exposure to all kinds of different government cultures, policies, procedures, because you as a private, you contract with the government to run prisons for the government. And when you do that, of course, you have to follow their policies, their culture, their procedures, their protocols, their audits, and so you get immersed, in their culture. So it's within the 28 years of 14 of those 28 years, I was a warden at 5 prisons across the United States. So, going back to that exposure to cultures, I was exposed to the BOP culture, exposed to multiple states, exposed to male, female, incarcerated people, exposed to maximum custody, minimum custody. So, it was a good learning experience because there were just so many systems and cultures to learn from. I say learn from goods and bads, but to learn from. So yeah, I left private corrections 8 months ago to start our new nonprofit.
Well, let's back up a little bit and talk about your work with CoreCivic. Like, as you noted, over the duration of your career with them, you wore many different hats, up to and including, you just alluded to this, that of warden. Maybe share with our listeners that experience, and again, what it was like working your way up the ranks, and again, as you've referenced, being exposed to all those other correctional systems.
Oh, absolutely. It's the warden position. For those that might not be familiar, is the head of the prison. It's the leader of the facility. In private corrections, you're about efficiencies, because that's why you exist. So, you tend to be more critical of what's happening and why it's happening, to become more efficient, to become more humane, to become better, at what you're doing, because again, it is a for-profit model. At the end of the day, you have to make a profit. But you have to be critical about what you do, how you do it. And, when I say that, it's not just about profit, it's about people. My experiences, were, that they were really carrying an ethical company, and so, that's why I stayed with them for 28 years. But yeah, it was a good learning journey. The different customers have different ways of doing corrections. At the end of the day, public safety is number one. Institutional safety and security is number 2. On any of the systems, make sure they don't leave until they're supposed to. Make sure that they don't hurt the staff or themselves while they're inside, and then clearly provide an environment that's open for change opportunities.
Yeah, I really applaud your infinite mindset there, and your willingness just to learn from those different systems, without forgetting about the client we serve. Obviously, you recently made the leap of faith, as we say, and launched Social Profit Corrections, where you currently serve as president. Share with our listeners your vision for Social Profit Corrections and what I think is somewhat of a unique business model that you've embraced.
Thank you, Joe. Going back to the conversation about being critical as a warden about why we do what we do, and I became frustrated is probably a light way of saying it, but frustrated with the outcomes of corrections. I'm not talking private corrections is 8% of the beds in the United States. So I'm not necessarily talking about private corrections. I'm talking about all corrections and how we do, corrections in our country. How do we operate our system? And again, asking the why questions and down to the bottom why and root cause. Over the years as a warden, I became more and more frustrated with our outcomes. You look at 2.2 million people in the system, which is insane. You look at the recidivism rate, and some will argue the numbers, but the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the last report was 83% are rearrested in some way level back in the system within 9 years of being released. Yet correctional officer lifespan is 16 years less than the general public. their suicide rates up to 39% greater than the general public. I mean, it's just this completely awful report card track record. And these are human beings we're talking about. This isn't about money. This is about people, and over the years, I became more and more frustrated, and I kept hoping, somebody was going to do something about it. And it was a calling. And, finally, I, in good conscience, I just couldn't continue to keep doing what I was doing the way I was doing it, because in all reality, I was part of the problem. And all I was doing is replicating what I was taught. All I was doing was following the policies that I was required to follow. But when you really, asking the questions about why are we doing this, there's no real good answers. Clearly safety and security it has to be, a priority inside of a secure facility, but how do you do that safety and security? That's, over the years, I started really processing the why question. Why is recidivism so high? Why is violence so high? Why do correctional officers live 16 years less than everybody else? What is it about the correctional culture in our country that's so stressful? Why? And it got to the point where, again, I had to do something about it. And so, I created the nation's first full service nonprofit corrections corporation. So I'm the founder of what we titled Social Profit Corrections. And our purpose is to change the culture in our country. I know how to make this work. There's a better way of doing it. So, that was the passion. That was the motivation. That's what, caused me to say, hey, 28-year career, with a good company, I'm done. We need to do this different. And I stepped off the cliff knowing I was going to be caught, and moving towards this whole concept of nonprofit prisons, which is unique. It's the first of its kind, not only in the United States, to be honest with you, it's first of its kind in the world. There is one nonprofit prison in the world, and that's in Belize. And that's because the Colby Foundation, observed they didn't have running water or sewer. They were completely being treated inhumane. And so they asked to take over just to get them some basic necessities. But that's it. We're a new concept.
I want to ask you a question. You noted you're a St. Cloud State alumni, as am I. And as you were speaking just now, Brian, about your 28-year frustration or sort of culminated and you said, I've got to stop this because this is just, crazy. There's got to be a better way. It reminded me of a story, and I'm trying not to put you on the spot here with your St. Cloud State recollection, but our department chair back then, Dr. Prout, always shared with us a story that when he was working with, I believe it was the Ohio State Troopers, he made a routine traffic stop, and it was somebody connected, a politician, and he was told to sort of, look the other way on that ticket, and it just sort of ethically rubbed him the wrong way, and he made that leap of faith and went back to school, got his PhD. He became our department chair at St. Cloud State, and I remember him telling us and saying that you're all going to have this at one point in your criminal justice careers. Where you sort of, again, question and have that moral dilemma. And it sounds like you had that, and that's why you launched social profit corrections. And I always tell folks that when I endeavor to train evidence-based practices, and again, this is to your point, it drives me crazy when I ask folks the why, and their response is always, well, we've always done it this way. Mm-hmm. And it is shocking how many folks in corrections and criminal justice will reply with that. Well, we've always done it this way. So it sounds like you had your epiphany moment and said, this is insane. We've got to do something different, which is, as you just articulated, social profit corrections.
Right. I mean, and I think it goes back to, at some point in our lives, we all ask, why are we here? What's our purpose? And many people, I think, don't ever really find their purpose. Well, I was blessed, because now I know why I did 28 years in corrections. I never intended to work in corrections. It's not like I grew up as a child and said, my brother wants to be a doctor, my sister wants to be a firefighter. I want to work in a prison. No. I mean, it's, it was kind of, why am I working in a prison? And I have that answer now. My experiences, I believe, were all supposed to happen, for this time, this moment, for myself and our team to work towards helping the government change the culture away from the punishment model, or away from static security, which I know is a new term for people. But, static security is the alarms and the doors and the counts and the searches, and move our culture to a dynamic security, which is human-based, people-based, and which is a root cause of the problem.
So expand on that concept of dynamic security a little bit more, because to your point, I don't think a lot of our listeners, even those working in corrections, may be familiar with that concept.
Yeah, good point. The whole 28 years, I wasn't aware of that concept. But it's when you look in corrections, rarely do you come up with original ideas. You just look at ideas that have worked or do work, within the community. And, a dynamic security is a European concept, a Scandinavian concept. If you look at the Norway model and you look at their successes, they took their recidivism from 91%, I believe, down to 20%, as compared to our current 83%, which is similar to their past. So you have to ask the question, well, how did you do that? Clearly their system, at one point was dysfunctional, because 91%, that's even worse than ours. They brought humanity to corrections, and really that's what dynamic security is. It's the people-based, the human-based, the professional relationships, and one of the root cause, I believe, in our country is by policy, by practice, by culture. We have prohibited staff from having relationships. And, I know that's a dangerous word in American corrections, but relationships with the incarcerated people. I'm not talking about personal relationships. Clearly that's a bad idea and wrong. But I'm talking about professional relationships, where we allow the staff, we allow the professionals to have purpose. They're not just there with their arms crossed and call codes when things go bad, crisis management to do their counts. They're there to help human beings. It's kind of more of a, I like to relate it to a coaching role. Correctional officers should be coaches, where they encourage. I don't expect them to teach, addictions treatment or, deal with mental health crisis, because they're not trained for that. They're not certified for that. But they can have a conversation. Good morning, Jeremy. How are you doing today? Did you have a conversation with your daughter last night? That we spoke about. Oh yeah, how'd it go? Just a professional conversation. Yes, I'm a parent. I can relate. You need to mend that bridge that you burnt with your family. Having these kinds of conversations. Or, do you have an education? No. Are you enrolled in the GED program? Yes. Well, I've been on the waiting list for 2 years. Okay. Well, let me make a call, and see if I can find out what's going on so I can help you get into school. Or no, and one of the challenges with incarcerated people is they haven't had many successes in life. So that, and many times they don't have a lot of confidence, encouraging them, coaching them, to engage in a GED, just as an example. Because we know if you have a basic education, your chance of coming back in the system is a lot less. So encouraging them to go to school, and then maybe even helping them. But our country is so afraid of staff being compromised, and they bring in contraband. Compromise, you bring in drugs. Compromise, you bring in cell phones. Compromise, you fall in love. Which is one of the more dangerous words in corrections. And so the policies and the culture over our 245 years has restricted staff from engaging in professional relationships. Well, we're human. We're wired to get along, to like people. We're social beings, and so in corrections, by policy, by process, by culture, you're told don't be human, don't interact, stay your distance. do your security responsibilities, but don't, engage with the population because you will or could become compromised. But my frustration when you look at the whys is, well, clearly that doesn't work because our prisons are full of cell phones, they're full of drugs, they're full of bad relationships, so this whole requiring people to disengage from the population is part of our root cause, which is part of our recidivism, which is part of the 16 years lifespan, of less. It's part of our dysfunction. I mean, that has to change.
We talk on the show quite a bit about evidence-based practices, and without getting too wonky, we talk about what we refer to as criminogenic need, or these sort of variables which lead to recidivism. And somebody much wiser than I pointed out that jails and prisons are criminogenic. Incarceration, by definition, is criminogenic. And you can relate to this with 28 years in corrections. A well-adjusted pro-social individual could be incarcerated, and I could make a strong case that they're going to come out they're going to pick up risk factors along the way. But when you put somebody, a vulnerable individual, a high-risk individual, an individual with these deficits, which we know lead to recidivism, into a correctional setting, and it's the setting that you just articulated, where there's a culture of not having relationships and those things. I was going to say it boggles the mind, but it attributes to those insane recidivism rates that you are articulated. But again, it's this notion of, well, we've always done it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's, for your audience, typically what happens when somebody comes in the system, they go through the course, they're brought to the facility, whether it's a jail or prison. They come in a pair of handcuffs. So they come in, the handcuffs are removed, they're strip searched, to make sure they don't have any contraband on them. And then they go through a process where they're given a number, and really that's who they are for the remainder of their time. They're inmate, Koehn, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the start of a toxic culture. And then they go into the units, and what do they immediately do? They pair up with their race for protection. Why do they need protection? I mean, I could talk about root cause for, way longer than this podcast could air. But we need to ask the question, why do they separate by race? Well, they do it for protection. Well, why do they need protection? Because it's a toxic culture. It's not one of reform. It's not one of helping. It's one of survival. Back to that whole punishment culture.
Yeah. And again, we could talk about the culture in this country, this sort of binary, we need this pound of flesh. And granted, that a punishment is a part of incarceration along with incapacitation and rehabilitation. But again, we've put the pedal to the metal on the punishment, and we've forgotten all about the reintegration and the rehabilitation piece. And when you were speaking and asking the rhetorical question of why do they need protection, you're right. I thought to myself, if we're running correctional facilities to improve outcomes, we should be running correctional facilities like learning centers or like treatment centers. And I thought to myself, again, you and I are both St. Cloud State alumni. When I set foot on campus at St. Cloud State, I didn't pair up with people along ethnic lines for protection. That was the least of my concerns. And if I had to do that, now I'm reflecting, how much would that have diminished my capacity to learn? If I was looking over my shoulder and I needed protection and I had all these other considerations. But that's exactly what we're doing in correctional facilities. And then we wonder why, well, gee, I don't understand. We're running these cognitive behavioral groups in a jail or a prison. Why aren't they as effective as they should be? Because we're not taking into consideration, again, everything else going on in that individual's reality, for lack of a better term.
You're right. It's, the reality is, and go back to the Scandinavian principles, part of how they reduce their recidivism to 20-ish%, which is great. Still not low enough, but good. is that they believe that the punishment is their restriction of freedoms from the court. That it's the system's responsibility to prepare them for release and to be good neighbors. So the inside culture is completely different than ours. They call each other by the first name, which is completely unheard of. In fact, you could get terminated in many systems for calling an incarcerated person by their first name. Yeah, it's, again, because they're afraid they're going to get compromised. But we need to have an environment on the inside that's learning. They need to have access. One of the metrics, that we have inside, and I will say corrections is terrible at measuring their outcomes on the inside of the facility. It's part of a root cause. But the idle time, so if half of your unit is idle, that means they're not engaged in a job or program, that they just sit around all day, with nothing to do but watch TV and play, the race politics and not be pro-social. And that's a root cause of our system. Part of that is culture based, part of that is resource based. But the reality is we can't keep doing it that way. I mean, if you're sitting around doing nothing, for years, at a time, and then we wonder why people come out of the system worse than they went in. Well, they're replicating what they learned outside of the prison. That was a root cause that put them inside of the prison, and they just keep replicating the same thing. And then their time is done and they're released, and then they go out and recidivate, and then we get frustrated on why. It's just the culture is broken and it needs to change.
So I'd like to think I've got a rather enlightened audience, Brian, but what would you say to a listener who might be thinking or has been aware of, as you've alluded to, those Scandinavian prison models, but who thinks that, hey, listen, I'm sorry, that's just too hug a thug. That's just, people will never learn their lessons if you treat them with kid gloves and create these campuses and these open, dynamic facilities as you describe them. What would your counter to that be?
Well, my counter, and I didn't really elaborate back on my experience, but before I was warden, I was the head of security of one of the private vendors. I was the security person over 65 prisons. So clearly that's an expertise that I have, when it comes to corrections. And the reality is the static model, static security, where, we don't engage in any professional relationships or communications with the population is bad security. Good security is engaging and encouraging for them to be, to make changes. And again, I can't force you to change. You can't force me to change. We can't force them to change, but we can provide an environment where change is okay. But the reality is, our system, if you have that belief set, where Kid Cub, they should be punished for what they've done, 95% of the 2.2 million are getting out. We're creating a whole new set of victims, because when they're getting out, they're not ready. They're not pro-social. They may not have their education. They go back to the same environment they came from. I grew up in the Marines, and I was as a younger person, to be transparent, I was a hard on crime kind of person. Just desserts, you hurt people, that's wrong and you should be punished for it. But the reality is, their punishment, takes somebody and completely remove them from society. They don't get to hug their kids. They don't get to do homework. They don't get to hang out on the street corner. They don't get to go and plow the field. That is punishment. But we want to make sure that we're preparing them for release. And even for those that don't, clearly the human side is the important side, but look at the financial side. Average of 36,000, somewhere right around per year, to incarcerate a person. Annual budget in the United States for corrections with direct and indirect costs is a little over $1 trillion a year. When we help somebody become a better person, help them make those choices, and they go into society and they're a productive member of society, number one, they're not coming back in to spend the $35,000. They're paying taxes, which goes back into the pool. They're taking care of their family. Children of those that are inside the system have a much greater chance of coming into the system themselves, in a single, parent family, because the remaining parent has to go out and make money, which causes the child to be alone way too often. And then they go looking, for support. And sometimes that's in areas that are not healthy. So what I would say to them is, coming from somebody who used to have those kinds of belief sets, that's not how we do it. Number one, we take care of our people. Let's put that $36,000 back into education, not back into the prisons.
We are kindred spirits, Brian, because I would have said some of the exact same things you said, up to and including that statistic that in the United States, 95% of incarcerated individuals are going to get out. So I'm playing the long game. And again, to your point, my response to folks who sort of hug that tough on crime mantle is, or talk about the victims, I'm thinking about the next victim when this individual is going to get released, which again, all but 5% are. And we cannot incarcerate our way out of the crime problem. It's just not financially feasible. And again, to your point, you talk to folks who've been incarcerated, being away from their loved ones, being out of the community, that is the punishment. It's not, we don't need to pile on and make it a miserable experience. I know you've worked in corrections enough years to know that, work at a facility around the holidays, and you'll see what that's like when folks are away from their loved ones. And again, that's the sanction there, folks. We don't need to pile on.
No, I agree totally. An analogy I like to use, if you don't mind me expanding, my experience, and there's no metrics to support this. This is this Brian Koehn, warden at 5 prisons to include a 5,000 bed complex experience. But those who come in the system, 10% of them just clearly from the beginning acknowledge I made a mistake. They're self-motivated. I am not coming back to prison. I am going home to my family. They self-enroll in programs. They study. They disengage from the race politics. They become productive inside the system, knowing that they're going to get out and they are not coming back. On the converse of that, there's 10% that are typically the younger population that are still engaged in gang activity and gang politics, where they still believe in a philosophy of if I don't have something, I'm going to take it. So a take versus give kind of mindset. In my experience, they're really hard to reach, at least until they get older. And then you got the 80% in the middle. So the focus, has always been, in my opinion, focus on the 80%. You can affect change within the 80%. And then you got the 10% that are already self-motivated. So if you focus on the 80%, that's 90% good that you're, human beings that you're reaching. Not that you say you don't make an effort to that other 10% that's still engaged in that antisocial thought process and lifestyle. But when we look at our return for our resources, if we focus on the 80, we get a 90% return. I think we could really see some good in our system, especially if we empower our officers and line staff to be coaches, not just security. I think the return we will see will be significant on reduced violence, on an increased, purpose for staff. So they're not 16 years lifespan less. And we'll see recidivism completely drop. There are 2 crises in our country right now in corrections. Number 1 is the staffing crisis, and number 2 is recidivism. They're directly connected. If we don't address the staffing crisis, which causes inconsistency, which is a root cause of all the problems in corrections, if we don't address the staffing crisis, we will never see our recidivism measures significantly improve. So that's one of in our nonprofit, that's one of our main focuses, is to help our government change the culture, specifically to staff retention, and giving them purpose, which the end result is they are going to take care of the population. So I know I jumped ahead a little bit probably on you there, but yeah, it's, there's the staffing crisis right now is the focus that all of us should be paying attention to.
Yeah, they are so symbiotic, like you said, between that and the larger recidivism question. If people are listening out there saying, hey, this social profit corrections model is just what we need, what can they do to learn more about you and your work with social profit corrections?
Thank you, Joe. I mean, we're 8 months old. We're brand new. And so we're a whole new solution to help our government reform our system. So you have government corrections, which is 92% of the beds, manage 92% of the beds in the United States, or the people in the United States are incarcerated. Then you have private corrections at 8%. Now there's a third option. So you have government corrections, private corrections, which is defined as for profit, and now nonprofit corrections. Support us, take a look at our website, spcor.org. If you're on LinkedIn, take a look at us on LinkedIn or any of the other social medias, and just take a look at what we're doing. Give us feedback on the goods and bads. We're a nonprofit. We're completely transparent. Our purpose is to learn. Our purpose is to apply the lessons to help the government, better manage the system, better lead the people. So we're new. We're still, we're a nonprofit, so we're going to need some financial help. We're going to need networking help. Pass on, who we are and what we're doing. And we're working towards our business model is really the first year of network, let people know we exist. And then move forward. We have a staffing solution for the government where we can help culture-wise and retention-wise with officers specifically and nurses, the two areas that you see in corrections that are the most difficult turnover-wise. Again, those vacancies cause inconsistency. Inconsistency is the root cause of all problems in corrections. We have an officer solution. We have a community solution where we can come into a community. We can help the jail with the staffing. We can help the jail with recidivism, with the jail with change initiatives, and the community with how do we prevent them from coming in the first place, and then how do we help return citizens once they're released. Those are kind of stepping stones to our end vision is to actually operate prisons for the government using dynamic security and normality, so that we can make change. And we feel that, if we can show the government that this other way of doing it, this compassionate way of running security has better outcomes, then we'll share it with everybody. We're a nonprofit. We're only motivated by helping people and making change. So we'll share what works. And again, as a nonprofit, we're a learning organization. We're also pair up with academics, to measure what we're doing, and we can make immediate changes. Where the government might take years to change something, we can change in months. If we find a program, it's evidence-based, we're measuring the outcomes, and we believe that, X is the benefit of it, and we measure it and we find out that's not the case. Okay, that didn't work. Let's change it. And that's unique because that doesn't exist. We don't, in corrections that run secure facilities, there aren't any agencies that have the ability to make quick changes. And we're not as worried about finances. Clearly we're a nonprofit. We can't lose money, but we can reinvest the net revenue, the benefit of our efficiencies of running the system back into the people. Again, our whole purpose is to help. So when you ask, what can you do? Support us. Be critical of what we're doing. Ask the questions. Critique us. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Facebook. And they both have my email. So, please reach out and support us.
I will leave a link for social profit corrections in the episode description of this podcast. And as you said, reach out to Brian on LinkedIn or reach out to the show, and I can act as an intermediary. What else would you like to leave our audience with, Brian? I love talking to folks like you with an infinite mindset who wish to tackle issues. What else is on the horizon? Or if you're back on the show in a few years, looking in your crystal ball, what do you think we might be talking about?
Well, Joe, I think if we come back in a few years, we're going to talk about the change in our culture and corrections. We're going to talk about humanity. We're going to talk about a reduction in violence. Recidivism is a 3-year study, so it takes a while for the benefits of your outcomes to be measured, especially by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. But we're going to have a conversation about humanity. We're going to have a conversation about lifespan for correctional officers. We're going to have a conversation about how prisons are not prisons anymore, We don't even call them prisons. We call them maybe, correctional communities, or maybe even, get rid of the word correctional, because that by nature is punitive. Maybe just learning communities, where, our culture has changed, to an environment where people have an opportunity to learn, and change, and they're not coming back in the system. That's what I would hope to see if we have a conversation in, say, 10 years.
Again, Brian, I love your vision and your passion and your positive outlook. You are welcome back on the show at any time. And again, I would encourage all of my listeners to reach out for Brian if corrections is in your wheelhouse, because as you just heard, he has some really innovative ideas on how to fix our broken system. Brian Koehn from Social Profit Corrections, I look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Brian. Thank you once again for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us, as well as your vision for how we can better deliver correctional services in this country. I have left a link for Social Profit Corrections, Brian's nonprofit, in the description of this episode. I encourage you to check it out and reach out to Brian. Again, you can find him and me on LinkedIn. Go ahead, reach out, and let's make some connections. Hey, I am very excited to share with you all a new project that the Criminologist podcast is taking on. We want to hear from you all, the listener, as to what it is like to view corrections through your lens. If you are a probation officer, a parole officer, a corrections officer, think of this as sort of a day in the life. And we are asking that you please share your probation stories, your corrections stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You can do so by checking in and leaving a voicemail at 612-552-2566. That's 612-552-2566. Or you can send a voice memo to probationcheckin@gmail.com. That's probationcheckin, all one word, at gmail.com. And if you are a justice-involved individual, or if you have desisted from crime, we want to hear from you and your probation stories as well. Tell us, what was supervision like? Something that we may not capture in the dry analytics of recidivism rates, or again, stuff we might capture on a spreadsheet, but we want to really hear your voices. A day in the life on supervision, if you will. We will be collecting anonymous phone calls from probation clients and probation officers all over the world. We really feel that communication is oftentimes at the foundation of making advancements. And as you all hear every week in the opening of this program, we like to paint an accurate portrait of the journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individuals. And that too often our perceptions are derived from media-driven caricatures. We are really seeking to remedy that from hearing from you all, the true subject matter experts. Again, share your probation stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and check in by leaving a voicemail at 612-552-2566 or sending a voice memo to probationcheckin@gmail.com. Audio recording should not include any specific names or locations and may potentially be used within a future podcast of, quote, a day in the life of, again, probation clients, probation officers. I will leave a link with that Gmail address to forward those stories to, again, in the show description of this episode. So let's start hearing from you all, the listener. Back next week with a fresh episode. Pleased to announce that friend of the show, Dr. Jared Brown of Concordia University in St. Paul, will be joining us, this time to talk about juvenile sex offenders, a fascinating topic. I encourage you all to tune in for that. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practice or implementation, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have any questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. We are also on Twitter. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. And hey, pleased to announce I've just launched a blog, so check out the blog as well. Information in the show notes of this episode. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. Hey, merchandise is now available if you're interested in pens or coffee mugs or refrigerator magnets, which we see popping up all over the world. Simply contact us for details. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the show, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
The punishment model, or away from static security, which I know is a new term for people, but static security is the alarms and the doors and the counts and the searches, and move our culture to a dynamic security, which is human-based, people-based, which is a root cause of the problem.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.